of Maegor the Cruel is one of the biggest mysteries in the early parts of Fire and Blood, and something that I think George R. R. Martin has intentionally kept ambiguous for a reason. To reveal what truly happened might hint strongly towards some plot elements to come in the main book series, but it's more than that. The death of Maegor itself has been designed by George to inherently be a mystery for a simple reason. Fire and Blood is written like a history book, and when you look back at real history, especially some of the more turbulent reigns of some of the English kings, there are these huge unanswered questions we simply don't know the answers to. For example, one of my favourites is the true fate of the princes in the Tower. Yeah, they were most likely killed, but we can never say for 100% certainty at this time. Filling Fire and Blood with these unanswered questions, in a way, makes George R. R. Martin's fictional world lore feel more real. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the death of Maegor the Cruel, and try to figure out what the most likely cause of his death. Was he murdered by someone close? Was he assassinated by a political rival? Were the Faceless Men involved? Or did he, in his despair at his looming defeat, take his own life? What demon possessed him? None can say. Even today, some give thanks his tyranny was a short one, but who knows how many noble houses might have vanished forever simply to sate his desires. The writings of Archmaester Yandel, the world of Ice and Fire, the Targaryen kings, Maegor I. Okay, so let's take a moment to set the scene and establish a little bit of context of the events that transpired that gloomy night in the throne room of the Red Keep. Maegor the Cruel, during the early part of his reign, while usurping the throne from Aegon the Uncrowned, was seen by many as a necessary evil in retrospect, in putting down the unrest of the Faith Uprising that begun during the end of the reign of his brother King Aenys. An uprising that had been allowed to get so out of control, despite the power of dragons, it nearly brought down House Targaryen itself. Once the faith situation was more under control, and it came to actually ruling the realm, Maegor's brutal nature and sheer cruelty began to wear down the lords who supported his usurpation of the throne. He earned the name the Cruel for a reason. His massacre of the workers who built the Red Keep, his harsh punishments and horrific treatment of his 6 wives, some of whom were brutally killed and had their houses wiped out. By 48 AC, Maegor Targaryen had pushed the Seven Kingdoms to utter breaking point. Opposition to the king had been growing for years, but now the realm firmly began to unite behind a rival claimant. As at Storm's End, Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen, the last surviving son of King Aenys, declared his intention to take the Iron Throne. Supporting him was Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, who was named both Protector of the Realm and Hand of the King. Just as importantly, Jaehaerys could call upon dragons. He rode Vermithor, while his sister, Rhaena, possessed Dreamfire, giving the young prince 2 dragon riders to challenge Maegor and the Black Dread. Princess Alysanne of course had her own Silverwing, but she would have been far too young to take part in any meaningful conflict at this stage. The situation grew even worse for Maegor when Queen Rhaena learned of her brother's claim. Rather than remain at Maegor's side, she fled King's Landing under the cover of darkness aboard Dreamfire, taking both the Valyrian Steel Sword Blackfire and her daughter Princess Arya along with her. In doing so, Maegor reacted with utter fury. He dispatched riders to Old Town ordering House Hightower to execute Rhaena's other daughter, Princess Rhaella, in retaliation for her mother's betrayal. Lord Hightower refused outright, imprisoning the messengers instead. Elsewhere, the king's support continued to crumble. Edwell Celtigar resigned his hand and returned to Claw Isle. Grand Maester Bennifer secretly fled across the Narrow Sea to Pentos, and 2 members of his Kingsguard, Sir Oliver Bracken and Sir Raymond Mallory, abandoned their king. The first of the great lords to openly turn against Maegor was Lord Daemon Velaryon, who sailed away with the royal fleet to join Jaehaerys. Others soon followed. Lannisters, Tyrells, Arryns, all declared against the king, while the Riverlords of House Tully lent support to Septon Moon and Sir Joffrey Doggett of the Poorfellows. In response, Maegor called his banners. Few answered. When the mustering was complete, the king could gather barely 4,000 men. Yet, even then, he refused to consider surrender. During his final war council, Lord Haeford suggested that Maegor abdicate and take the Black. The king answered by ordering his execution. Haeford was beheaded, and the council continued with his severed head displayed upon a lance behind the throne. After the council dispersed, Maegor remained alone in the throne room. The following morning, he was discovered dead by Queen Elinor Costayne. He sat upon the iron throne, his robes soaked with blood, his wrists had been slashed, and one of the throne's barbs had pierced the back of his neck. Whether Maegor took his own life, or was murdered, or fell victim to some darker fate remains one of the great mysteries of Targaryen history. So who killed Maegor? The first name that often gets brought up is Queen Elinor Costayne, one of his black brides, and the person who discovered the body the next day. Much of the evidence fans point to is very circumstantial and relies solely on the fact that she, out of everyone in the Red Keep at this time, had the biggest personal motivation to murder her husband. Elinor wasn't exactly willing to marry Maegor, far from it. Prior to marrying Maegor, Elinor was seemingly happily married to Sir Theo Bolling, with the pair having 3 children. In 47 AC, her husband was suddenly arrested and accused of conspiring to crown Jaehaerys, and swiftly executed. Elinor was summoned to marry Maegor, whom specifically looking to wed women of proven fertility. Her son's presence at the wedding ensured she would play her part in the ceremony. Elinor's sons were sent away after her wedding. Her eldest fostered at the Eyrie, her second son at Highgarden, and her youngest was given to a wet nurse, as he was too young to send away. So her husband was killed on Maegor's orders, her children used as leverage to ensure her compliance. But it gets even deeper than that. In 48 AC, when Queen Tyenna at the Tower admitted to poisoning Queen Alice Haraway during her pregnancy, she promised the same fate would happen to the pregnant Elinor. 2 months later, Tyenna was proven correct when Elinor gave birth to a stillborn abomination said to have been born eyeless with small wings. So Elinor had a lot of motivation to want to kill Maegor. But the main issue we have here, Elinor as the murderer, is the mechanics of her actually killing Maegor. The wounds the king received were brutal, his wrists deeply slashed, a blade of the Iron Throne through his neck. By all accounts, Elinor was described as the average woman and not much of a fighter. Maegor, on the other hand, was a warrior to the bone, fiercely strong, physically huge and imposing. It's very hard to believe Elinor could have overpowered him in such a way. There is an alternative version of this idea, that Elinor took inspiration from her being poisoned by Tyenna at the Tower, and upon visiting Maegor that night, she laced his wines with poison, then cut his wrists and impaled him on the throne to cover her tracks. But while the mechanics of this idea works much better, we have no actual evidence in text that any of this could have happened. King Maegor wanted no rats in his own walls, if you take my meaning. He did require a means of secret egress, should he ever be trapped by his enemies, but that door does not connect with any other passages. Varys the Spider to Tyrion Lannister, A Storm of Swords Chapter 12, Tyrion 2. Lord Towers and Rosby for some fans are also prime suspects, and while they certainly could have had the opportunity, their motive for murdering Maegor is so much more difficult to define. After the King's War Council, Rosby and Towers were left alone in the throne room with Maegor, and were the last to actually see him alive. So they certainly could have had the opportunity to kill the king. After they left the throne room, the Kingsguard stationed outside saw no one else enter until the king was found dead by Elinor Costayne. Something that's also a bit odd about this whole situation is why there was no Kingsguard physically with Maegor inside the throne room. I know at this stage, after the defections, they were limited in number, but surely rather than having both on the door, it would have made sense to at least have one Kingsguard knight to actually physically be guarding the king. It seems like a huge security oversight that gives potential killers a prime opportunity. You could even make a case that perhaps this was an intentional oversight, that maybe the Kingsguard willingly turned a blind eye. But again, this doesn't track with the facts we know. If they were willing to turn a blind eye to murder the king, why not just defect with their brothers to Jaehaerys in the first place? We also know that when Maegor's body was discovered the next morning, Rosby killed himself with hemlock as a final act of loyalty to his king, whom he had supported to the bitter end. Supporters of this idea that Rosby and Towers killed the king point more to this not being an act of loyalty and more so as a form of self-preservation. But my main counter to this is why would Rosby then take his own life if that was the motivation? Guilt maybe? Or maybe he really was just that loyal to Maegor, standing by him to the bitter end. So much so that he knew that with Jaehaerys marching on King's Landing, he had few options left in regards to choosing his own fate. The same issue might apply in terms of the actual killing of Maegor as it does with Elinor Costayne. While Towers and Rosby have a much better chance of overpowering Maegor, given Maegor's known size and strength, given just how powerful he was, I would still put my money on the king in a struggle. Also consider this. We do know for a fact that Rosby had access to Hemlock. Given he and Towers were the last to see the king alive, they likely could have had an opportunity to have poisoned the king, the same way proposed that Elinor Costayne could have done. My main issue with the Rosby Towers theory is it really lacks any clear motive outside of self-preservation. Wouldn't make sense anyway, given like the other lords who attended Maegor's Wall Council, they could have just had a chance to flee, rather than Rosby killing himself. They certainly had a clean opportunity and logical method to overcome Maegor. The question is, why would they? It's very clear why the Maesters put a lot of suspicion on the remaining Kingsguard, but at the same time, the fact there is no known historical record of who the two Kingsguard knights guarding the king that night actually are does make me question the whole concept. But I struggle with accepting the theory for the same reasons I struggle to believe that Rosby and Towers were responsible for Maegor's death. Yes, whomever the two Kingsguard knights guarding Maegor that night had the clearest opportunity to assassinate the king. While we know Rosby and Towers were the last men to see the king alive, we forget that the men guarding the door would have been the men whom saw Rosby and Towers leave. That means the rest of the night, these two Kingsguard knights, while stationed outside the door of the throne room, had the perfect opportunity to enter and kill Maegor without being seen. Even if they witnessed entering the throne room, there's nothing really suspicious or a smoking gun about that. The mechanics of the Kingsguard killing Maegor also makes more sense than Rosby and Towers or Elinor Costayne. Two of the most high-skilled warriors in the realm have a much more viable chance of overpowering Maegor, especially if they had the element of surprise. But here's the issue. Why bother? It's clear at this point Maegor is doomed. All you have to do at this point is wait for Jaehaerys to arrive with his army, and Maegor is done. I can maybe see an argument to say the weight of the amount of death and destruction that fight with Maegor would cause could have played on the conscience of the Kingsguard, but there is nothing in the text to really support this. I also suspect the Kingsguard would not have acted independently or on their own. They would likely have been a part of a larger plot, with the Kingsguard being the weapon used to kill Maegor, but not necessarily the instigator. One version of this theory is they were in direct communication with the two Kingsguard knights who had defected to Jaehaerys, and word had been sent from perhaps Rhaegar Baratheon or Alyssa Velaryon for them to assassinate the king and make way for Jaehaerys' peaceful ascension to the throne. But the trouble is with this, the bigger the plot to kill the king, the more chance that the plot would be uncovered after the fact, especially when it comes to a crime as serious as regicide. I think if there were a plot, there would have been a paper trail, there would have been more people involved, and we would know more about it. More so if the Kingsguard seriously did kill Maegor. I'm certain we would at least known which two members of the Kingsguard it was on guard that night. Do you have any idea how costly they are? You could hire an army of common sellswords for half the price, and that's for a merchant. I don't dare think what they might ask for a princess. Peter Baelish to Grand Maester Pycelle, A Game of Thrones Chapter 33, Eddard 8. Maybe the most popular fan theory is that Maegor was assassinated by the Faceless Men. We know from the main book series the sheer power of the organisation, so they definitely have the reach and skill to pull off such an assassination. The Faceless Men, for a price, will agree to kill anyone in the known world, considering this contract to be a sacrament of their god. The price is always high or dear, but within the means of the person if they are willing to make the sacrifice. The cost of their service also depends on the prominence and security of the target. We also know that the Faceless Men, given their origins in the slave mines of old Valyria, are very anti-Valyrian. That could mean Targaryen, so that could play a factor into why they would agree to kill a Targaryen king. I think the main reason many fans flock to this answer is because on the surface it's easy to apply this logic rather than make any sense of the other options. But by the very nature of the Faceless Men is why I don't think they killed Maegor. We know the price of a hit depends on the target. Maegor being the king of the Seven Kingdoms and well guarded in the Red Keep, would make the cost of an assassination on him unimaginable. The cost on a hit also scales with the position and resources of the person making it. There are very few people in the realm with the gold to actually pay to have Maegor killed. Remember, Jaehaerys is a child at this point and doesn't have access to the treasury, meaning he's likely being bankrolled by his mother's house, House Targaryen, and Rhaegar Baratheon directly. Both of these people are well off and come from rich houses, but enough to kill a king is another matter. I don't know. We must also recall that by this stage Maegor's cause was all but lost. There likely would have been a bloody battle, and Maegor would have used the Black Dread, but his position was politically untenable. Jaehaerys did have Vermithor as well, and Rhaena had Dreamfire, so Maegor's chances were increasingly slim. Why would Rhaegar or Alyssa spend that much money just to expedite Maegor's downfall when he was doing that himself? But ignoring all of this, there is just too many practical reasons as to why the Faceless Men just don't work. George R. R. Martin has been very careful how he has used them in the lore, because if any rivalry or political dispute could be solved by the Faceless Men, then the world building just falls apart. What's to stop, say, House Bracken having a Blackwood Lord assassinated using the Faceless Men, and vice versa? Why didn't the Boltons historically just employ the Faceless Men to remove the Starks and make themselves the Kings of Winter? Why didn't Daeron II just pay the Faceless Men to remove Daemon Blackfire? Why didn't any of the people that Aegon IV had wronged have him assassinated? Why didn't Rhaenyra or Aegon II simply have the other assassinated? The functional power of the Faceless Men has to be artificially limited by George R. R. Martin, or the world lore just breaks down. Every aspect of the story can be answered by, why not just use the Faceless Men? So when George introduced the Faceless Men into the story, I don't think he considered the world-breaking impact the group of super assassins would have on the world lore, hence why he's retroactively gone back and fleshed them out, to make the cost of the assassination scale with the importance and position of the person being assassinated, as well as the person ordering the assassination. There is a minor theory that I do actually enjoy, that has no basis, but makes sense. Some have speculated that when Maegor purged the builders of the Red Keep in order to protect its secrets, maybe a few were missed. Maybe using their knowledge of the secret tunnels, they infiltrated the Red Keep and killed Maegor. If that were the case, however, they certainly have excellent dramatic timing. Now, here's the boring truth. I really do believe that Maegor did commit suicide. The walls were closing in around him. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. He had no supporters, no family around him, no heir. He was despised by most of the realm, and anyone who did still back him mostly did so out of fear. It's not hard to believe that Maegor would want to go out on his own terms by his own hand, rather than suffer humiliating defeat at the hands of his nephew, who still hadn't even come of age. In fact, this is a very common outcome for defeated historical leaders, from Mark Antony to Hitler. In a way, George R. R. Martin writing Maegor's downfall like this makes the fictional history feel a little bit more authentic. More so because we don't have all the answers. There's also another aspect of this that gets greatly overlooked because this event is often looked at in isolation, without the rest of the context of Maegor as a person. It is theorized that Maegor suffered some sort of brain damage as a result of a blow to the head he received during his trial of 7 that resulted in him badly wounded and left unconscious for weeks. It's implied that after this, Maegor was much more brutal, cruel, with a mood that shifted like sand. It's not hard to suggest this could have led to him developing some sort of mental health issue that factored into the choices he made. I do also wonder if the concept of Aegon's prophecy could have also been a factor in this as well. We know that the prophecy that was introduced in House Targaryen came directly from George R. R. Martin, and that some version of it is likely canon to the books. We know the knowledge of Aegon's dream of the long night was passed from king to king. It's not hard to believe that Aegon the Conqueror had told his sister wives Rhaenys and Visenya in turn had told Maegor about it. It's also not out of the question that Aegon himself told Maegor, or even his brother Aenys. Perhaps this pressure of building this dynasty to stop the end of the world just got too much for Maegor and contributed to his worsening mental health. In fact, when you look at many of the choices Maegor made during his reign through the lens of the prophecy, they start to seem less erratic and make a little bit more sense, such as his sheer determination to protect and keep House Targaryen strong, marrying 6 women to try and procreate an heir. Hell, If he thought that Aegon the Uncrowned or any of Aenys' sons were too weak to rule the realm and keep House Targaryen prosperous, which isn't out of the question given the faith situation at the time, then maybe he believed he was the only way to fulfill Aegon's prophecy. Regardless, all of this could have impacted Maegor's mental health and his choices. So while this idea of Maegor taking his own life is the most boring of these answers, I do think that given the context we have, it does make the most sense. But given the sheer amount of enemies that Maegor made up and down Westeros over his reign, the list of people who had motive to want him dead is frankly endless. This is just one of those mysteries that is supposed to be a mystery, but something George R. R. Martin has intentionally written in such a way to make his fictional history feel more authentic.